I stood on that cracked Atlanta sidewalk in the pouring rain, clutching a plastic garbage bag filled with my only belongings, watching my eldest daughter pull the silk curtains shut. She did not know that the woman she just called a homeless nuisance was the same mother who had built the empire that paid for her luxury life. The iron gate did not just lock me out. It locked her inside a cage of her own making, and the key was in my pocket the whole time. Before I go any further, let me say something honest. If this opening hit you in any way, subscribe to Voices of Emily so you stay here with me for the rest of this story. I am putting a part of myself into these words, and I want you to walk through it with me. And when you can leave a comment telling me what this moment reminded you of, your voice matters here. Then tap the like button so this story reaches someone who might need it more than we know. My name is Eloise Montgomery, and for 40 years, I was the woman who built Montgomery Southern Textiles from a single sewing machine in a basement to a company that clothed half of this country. I am 70 years old now, and my bones carry the weight of every stitch I ever made. When my husband, Silas, passed away 15 years ago, the world expected me to fold like a poorly hemmed sheet. The bankers came with their sharp suits and their sharper smiles, waiting for a grieving widow to sign away the legacy. But they did not know the steel in my spine was forged in the heat of a Georgia summer, without air conditioning. I worked 20 hours a day, learning the math of the business while I still had the lint of the factory floor in my hair. I negotiated with men who did not want to see a black woman at the head of the table, and I won every single time. I did it all for my 3 children, Chantel, Terrence, and Malik. I wanted them to have the soft life I never knew. I wanted them to walk into a room and never have to prove they belonged there. Do you ever wonder if giving your children everything actually robs them of the very thing they need to survive? Chantel became a high-powered attorney, a woman who measured her worth by the height of her heels and the zip code of her mansion in Cascade Heights. Terrence moved into the world of technology, building apps and collecting cars like they were toy marbles. I paid for the Ivy League degrees, the European vacations, and the million-dollar weddings. But Malik, my youngest, he was different. He chose to teach history at a middle school in the neighborhood where we started. He married Jasmine, a girl who worked at a nonprofit and did not have a famous last name or a trust fund. The rest of the family treated Malik and Jasmine like a smudge on a white tablecloth. At Sunday dinners, Chantel would talk about her trips to Paris, and Terrence would boast about his new Porsche, while Malik and Jasmine just sat there, holding hands under the table. I am ashamed to say that I stayed silent during those dinners. I let the arrogance of my older children fill the room, because I thought their success was my success. But a few weeks ago, sitting in my office on the top floor of the Montgomery building, the silence finally became too loud to ignore. I had received 3 phone calls that afternoon. Chantel wanted $200,000 to renovate a kitchen that was already perfect. Terrence needed $80,000 to cover a bad investment he had made with his fraternity brothers. And then there was Malik. He called just to ask if I had taken my blood pressure medicine, and to see if I wanted to come over for some of Jasmine's homemade peach cobbler. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. 2 children saw me as a bank, and only 1 saw me as a mother. That was the night I decided to conduct the test. I needed to know if I had raised children, or if I had raised monsters with very expensive taste. I contacted my lawyer and oldest friend, Mr. Henderson. I told him I wanted to disappear for a week. I wanted to look like I had lost everything in a sudden legal collapse. He told me I was being too dramatic, that a woman of my age should not be playing games on the street. But it was not a game to me. It was a search for the truth. I went to a thrift store across town where nobody knew the name Eloise Montgomery. I bought a moth-eaten coat, a pair of shoes with soles so thin I could feel every pebble, and a stained headscarf. I locked my diamonds in the safe and left my gold watch on the nightstand. I did not wash my hair for 4 days, and I rubbed a little bit of Georgia red clay onto my hands and under my fingernails. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I saw a woman who had been discarded by time. The plan was simple. I would walk to each of their homes and tell them the company had been seized by the government. I would tell them I was broke and had nowhere to go. I wanted to see who would open the door, and who would pretend they did not recognize the face that had smiled at them from across every birthday cake they ever had. My heart was pounding as I walked out of my penthouse and into the cold night air. I had a burner phone in my pocket to call Mr. Henderson if things got dangerous, but I promised myself I would not use it unless it was a matter of life or death. The first night was the hardest. I spent it on a bench in a park I used to own. The wind whipped through that thin coat, and I realized very quickly that the world is a very different place when you do not have a credit card to protect you. People walked past me like I was invisible. A group of teenagers laughed and threw a half-eaten burger near my feet. I sat there shivering, thinking about the silk sheets and the heated floors I had left behind. Is it not strange how quickly we forget that we are all just one bad day away from the sidewalk? By the third day, my feet were covered in blisters that had popped and started to bleed. I had not eaten anything but a bag of stale crackers I found in the bottom of my garbage bag. I was tired, I was hungry, and I was ready to see my children. I started with Chantal. Her house was a fortress of limestone and glass, protected by an iron gate that I had paid $40,000 for 3 years ago. I pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Chantal's voice came through the speaker, sounding annoyed and sharp. She told me she did not have any change for solicitors, and to move along before she called the security patrol. I leaned into the speaker and whispered, "Chantal, it is me. It is Mama." There was a silence so long I thought the connection had died. Then the gate buzzed open just enough for me to squeeze through. I walked up the long driveway, feeling the weight of her judgment before I even reached the front door. Chantal opened the door just a crack. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than Malik made in a month. Her hair was wrapped in an expensive towel, and she smelled of jasmine and privilege. She looked at my dirty face and my torn clothes with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not pull me inside. She just stood there, blocking the entrance to the home I had bought for her as a wedding present. Why do the people we give the most to always seem to have the least to offer when the roles are reversed? I told her the story. I told her the auditors had come, that the bank accounts were frozen, and that I had been sleeping in the park. I told her I just needed a bed for one night and a hot meal. Chantal looked over her shoulder, worried that her neighbors might see the homeless woman on her porch. She told me that she was hosting a charity gala committee meeting that evening, and that my presence would be a scandal she could not afford. She said I was being irresponsible for losing the money she was counting on for her inheritance. "Mama, I have a reputation," she hissed, her voice low and poisonous. "I cannot have you here looking like this. It would be in the papers by morning. You should have been more careful with the business. If you are really broke, there are shelters downtown that cater to people in your situation. I am sorry, but I have to think about my own future." She reached into her silk pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, flicking it toward me like I was a dog. The paper hit my chest and fluttered to the wet ground. The sound of that door closing was the sound of a heart breaking. I stood there looking at that $20 bill on the ground, and I realized that to my eldest daughter, I was nothing more than a financial asset that had depreciated to zero. I did not pick up the money. I turned around and walked back down that long driveway, my legs feeling like lead. I had one son left who lived in the wealthy district, and I hoped against hope that Terrence would be different. I hoped he would remember the nights I sat by his bed when he had the croup. It took me 2 hours to walk to Terrence's penthouse. By the time I arrived, my feet were so painful I had to stop every few yards to catch my breath. The doorman at his building tried to shoo me away, but I told him I was Terrence Montgomery's mother. He laughed in my face until I showed him a small birthmark on my wrist that Terrence had once mentioned in a magazine interview. He reluctantly called up, and a few minutes later, Terrence came down to the lobby. He did not invite me up to his apartment. Terrence looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. He was wearing a suit that was tailored to perfection, and he looked every bit the successful tech-mogul I had raised him to be. But his eyes were cold, colder than the wind outside. He told me he had heard about the trouble at the company through the grapevine. He said he had already spent his quarterly bonus and did not have any liquid cash to help me. He told me that my failure was an embarrassment to the family brand, and that he could not be seen associating with me until I sorted myself out. "I am a businessman, mother," Terrence said, stepping back so my dirty coat would not touch his suit. "And in business, we do not throw good money after bad. You let the company slip through your fingers, and now you want me to pay for your mistakes? I have a board of directors to answer to. I cannot have a mother who is a liability. Here, take this and find a motel on the outskirts of town. Do not call me again until you have a plan to fix this." He handed me a crumpled $50 bill and turned his back on me. I stood in that marble lobby, surrounded by the smell of expensive cologne and success, and I felt more alone than I had on the park bench. 2 children, 2 rejections, and 2 stabs to the soul. I had given them the world, and they would not even give me a chair in their foyers. I walked out into the rain, the $50 bill clutched in my hand, and I started the long walk toward the West End. I started the walk toward the small house with the peeling paint where Malik and Jasmine lived. By the time I reached their street, the sun was starting to come up, but I could barely see it through the gray clouds. My body was shaking so hard I could hear my teeth rattling. Malik's house was small, a modest bungalow with a porch swing and a garden filled with collard greens and marigolds. It was the kind of house where the windows were always a little bit drafty, but the kitchen was always warm. I collapsed onto the porch and managed to knock on the door one time before my strength gave out completely. Malik opened the door, wearing his old college sweatshirt and a pair of pajama pants. When he saw me slumped there, he did not hesitate for a single second. He did not ask about the company. He did not ask about my clothes. He just yelled for Jasmine and scooped me up in his arms like I was a child. He carried me inside and laid me on their sofa, which was worn and had a patch on the armrest where the fabric had thinned. Jasmine came running out with a blanket, her face filled with genuine terror and love. Let me pause for just a second. This part of the story is where things start to get heavier, and I want you to stay with me for it. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. It keeps you close while I take you through the rest of this. And if something in this stirred a memory in you, tell me in the comments. After that, press like so this story does not disappear into the feed. Jasmine did not care that I was covered in dirt and rain. She knelt down and started taking off my wet shoes, her hands gentle and warm. She saw the blisters on my feet and let out a soft cry of pain. She did not look at me with disgust. She looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. Malik was already in the kitchen, heating up some soup and calling for a doctor. I tried to tell them the story, but the words would not come out. I just started to cry deep, racking sobs that had been building up for 70 years. "Hush now, Mama," Malik said, sitting on the edge of the sofa and pulling my head to his chest. "You are home. It does not matter what happened to the money or the buildings. We have you, and that is all that matters. Jasmine, get the guest room ready. We are moving the heater in there." I protested, knowing they only had 2 bedrooms and one was for their little girl, but Malik would not hear of it. He told me that as long as they had a roof, I had a roof. Do you know the feeling of being truly seen when you have nothing left to offer? Jasmine helped me into a warm bath, washing my hair with the same care I used to wash Malik's when he was a baby. She gave me a clean nightgown that smelled of lavender and sunshine. When I came out, there was a bowl of hot chicken soup waiting for me. I sat at their small kitchen table, looking at the chipped plates and the mismatched chairs, and I realized that this was the most beautiful room I had ever been in. Malik and Jasmine sat with me, not asking for explanations, just offering their presence as a shield against the world. That night, I lay in their guest bed, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard the floorboards creak as they moved about, and then I heard them whispering in the kitchen. I know I should not have listened, but I needed to hear their truth. I moved quietly to the door and leaned my ear against the wood. I heard Malik say that they were down to their last $100 until payday, and that the car needed a new alternator. My heart sank. I had come here to test them, but I was also a burden they could not afford. "We will sell my wedding ring," I heard Jasmine say. Her voice was steady, without a hint of regret. "It is a good diamond, Malik. We can get enough to pay the bills and keep your mama fed and comfortable until she gets back on her feet. A ring is just a piece of metal, but she is your mother. We cannot let her suffer while we have something of value sitting in a jewelry box." Malik sighed, and I could tell he was crying. He told her he did not deserve a woman like her, and she told him that they were a family, and family takes care of its own. I went back to bed and cried myself to sleep. I had judged Jasmine for years, thinking she was not good enough for my son because she did not come from money. But she was the only one with a heart made of gold. She was willing to give up the symbol of her marriage to save a woman who had never even given her a kind word at Sunday dinner. I realized then that I had been the poor one all along. I had millions in the bank, but I was spiritually bankrupt until I walked into this house. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Malik and Jasmine were acting like everything was normal, trying to hide their worry behind smiles and gentle conversation. But I knew what I had to do. I waited until 10 o'clock, and then I asked Malik if I could use his phone to call an old friend. He handed it to me without question. I dialed Mr. Henderson's private number and told him it was time. I told him to bring the cars and the paperwork to the West End. An hour later, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up in front of the small bungalow. The neighbors were peeking out of their windows, wondering what the government wanted with Malik and Jasmine. Mr. Henderson stepped out of the lead car, looking every bit the high-priced attorney he was. Malik and Jasmine stood on the porch, looking confused and a little bit frightened. They thought the creditors had followed me there to take what little they had left. Malik stepped in front of me, his jaw set, ready to protect me from the world. "Mr. Henderson," I said, stepping forward and standing tall, despite the blisters on my feet. "I believe you have something for me." Henderson bowed his head and handed me my gold watch and a leather folder. He looked at Malik and Jasmine and smiled. "Mr. Montgomery, your mother is one of the wealthiest women in this state. The bankruptcy was a fiction. A test of character, if you will. And I must say, you and your wife are the only ones who pass with flying colors." Malik looked at me, then at the cars, then back at me. He did not look happy. He looked hurt. "A test, Mama," he whispered. "You let us worry like that? You let us think you were dying on the street just to see if we would love you." I took his hands in mine, and for the first time in my life, I apologized. I told him that I had created monsters in Chantel and Terrence, and I needed to know if I had lost him too. I told him that their love was the only real thing I had left in this world. Just then, 2 more cars pulled up. Chantel and Terrence jumped out, having been alerted by Mr. Henderson's office that the situation had changed. When they saw me standing there in my clean nightgown with a fleet of security behind me, their faces went from pity to terror. They realized in a heartbeat that they had just thrown away their inheritances for the sake of a $20 bill and a reputation at the country club. They tried to run toward me, their voices filled with fake concern and apologies, but the security team blocked their path. "Mama, we were just coming to find you," Chantel cried, her eyes darting toward the leather folder. We had to make arrangements. You caught us at such a bad time, but we were going to come get you today. Terrence nodded frantically, trying to look like the dutiful son. I was just moving some funds around, Mother. I had to make sure I had the best care for you. Please, you know we love you. I looked at them, and I did not feel anger anymore. I only felt a deep, profound sadness for the people they had become. I stepped off the porch and walked toward them, the cold air feeling good against my skin. I told them to be quiet. I told them that I had heard every word they said when they thought I was nothing. I told them that they were no longer my children in the eyes of the law or the eyes of my heart. I had Mr. Henderson hand them each a final check for $100, the exact amount of the money they had offered me on the street, plus interest. I told them that would be the last thing they ever received from the Montgomery estate. They screamed, they begged, and they cursed, but I did not look back. I went back inside the small bungalow and sat down with Malik and Jasmine. I told them that I was buying the house next door, and the house next to that. I told them I was setting up a foundation for Malik's school, and that Jasmine would be the CEO of a new nonprofit with a $10 million endowment. But more than that, I told them I was staying for dinner. I wanted that peach cobbler, and I wanted to hear more about Malik's students. Before I close this story, let me say this. Telling stories like this takes something out of me. And if you found any meaning in it, subscribe to Voices of Emily, so we stay connected for the next one. Then share a comment with your thoughts or your experience. I read everyone because your perspective matters more than you think. And if this story left an imprint on you, tap the like button so it reaches someone who might be walking through their own version of it tonight. I am sitting on that same worn-out sofa now, writing these words while my granddaughter plays at my feet. The big mansion in Cascade Heights is gone. I sold it and gave the money to a homeless shelter downtown. I realized that a house is just a box unless it is filled with people who would sell their wedding rings for you. Money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy the way Malik looks at me or the way Jasmine calls me mama without hesitation. I found my way back to what matters, and it only cost me $58 million and a few blisters. It was the best bargain I ever made.